We live in a world of limited resources. And whether we like it or not, living as if those resources will never run out, it creates serious problems for both ourselves and for others. Those who are wise, they don't ignore this reality, they simply adjust to it. And so when water is scarce, they conserve it. When money is tight, they make the decision, hey, maybe we'll eat at home a little bit more. When they're running on empty, they don't keep pushing forward. They actually take the time to pause and rest. Now, here's the irony. We often manage our most valuable resource, the one that we've been given, with the least amount of wisdom. Now, what limited resource is that? Psalms 90 answers that question. This psalm is introduced as a prayer of Moses, a man of God. Now, if that is accurate, if Moses wrote this particular psalm, it makes it the oldest psalm in the book, in the Bible, in the book of Psalms. Now, as many of you know, Moses was the man who was chosen by God to lead Israel out of Egyptian captivity. And for 40 years, he led God's people through the wilderness. He buried an entire generation because of their unfaithfulness. Very few people knew or understood the brevity of life, the certainty of death, and the faithfulness of God more than this man, Moses. And it's at the heart of this prayer, Psalm 90, Moses makes this particular request. He simply says this, "Teach us to number our days." Now, why does he make that request? Is this simply about making the most of our time? Is he saying that help us to understand how to squeeze the most out of life? Actually, it goes much deeper than that. To truly understand why Moses makes this request, you have to understand where Moses begins. And he begins by first saying, hey, I want us to really invite us to take a look up. Listen to how he begins the psalm. Lord, you have been our dwelling place throughout all generations. Again, think about our man Moses. He spent 40 years leading a people who had no permanent home. They lived in tents, packing up and moving whenever God decided now was the time to move to a new place. And yet Moses makes this statement that God, you are our dwelling place. In other words, God, you are our home. It's an old statement, but it's so true. There is no place like home. There's so many reasons for that. One is because the home is the place that you belong. You always have a seat at the table. The home is the place that you're known. There are things that family members know about one another that nobody else knows. The home is the place that you are loved, even on your worst days. And what the earthly home does imperfectly, God does perfectly. Generations come and go, but God remains the dwelling place of his people. And Moses takes this thought even further in verse 2. God has not merely been faithful through every generation. Moses goes on to say he has existed before there were generations at all. Verse 2, before the mountains were born, or you brought forth the whole world, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. I don't know about you, but I love the beautiful golden hills that surround us in this area. But they don't create the same sense of awe in me quite like the Sierras or the Rockies or the Tetons. Mountains are majestic. They cast a long shadow across the landscape. There is this sense of permanence about them. And those mountains have existed long before we existed, and unless Jesus comes again, they'll exist long after we have already come and gone. And yet Moses says, I want you to know this about the mountains. Before they even existed, there was God. He existed. Before the first sunrise, God existed. Before the first human took a breath, God existed. Before the start of human history, God existed. And when every generation represented in this room has come and gone, God will still be God. Now, why does Moses want us to see that? Well, we have a tendency as human beings to build our lives on things that cannot ultimately bear that weight. I think Kelly mentioned it this morning. There's one constant in life, and that is change. The circumstances change, people change, bodies change, jobs change, plans change, but God does not change. From everlasting to everlasting, He is God. His character never changes. His purposes never fail. His promises never fade. And that's why Moses calls Him our dwelling place. Because when everything else shifts beneath our feet, we discover that He alone is our sure foundation. So Moses says, let's start right there. Let's look up. Let's understand who God is. That He's our dwelling place. He's eternal. He's constant. He will not change. But now Moses says, I need us to look in the mirror. And we actually look in the mirror. One thing that immediately becomes obvious is this, is that we are getting older. We're getting older. Now, for the first part of life, that's exciting, right? That means you're getting taller and stronger and smarter and more coordinated. I mean, you can't wait for the next birthday because it means you're getting bigger. But then somewhere in this process, very quietly, things begin to reverse. And at first, it's not even noticeable. But then comes a point where you cannot deny it. Wrinkles appear. Hair turns gray, or it falls out, or it grows in places where it never has before. Things that used to be tight begin to sag. And for many of us, we try to kind of hold this off through what? Through exercise and nutrition and rest, and we put cream on our face. Whatever we can do, and others of us, we just try to hide it from others. And so there is tightening and tucking and coloring and all these things. And you may be able to hide it from others, but you cannot hide it from yourself because your body won't let you. You find yourself reaching for your reading glasses. You wake up in the morning sore and you haven't done anything. You find yourself saying, huh? A lot more often. And using the bathroom more than you ever have before. This isn't the script, but I'll share this little story with you very quickly. I was playing pickleball last Friday, and there was a sixth grader out there playing as well, and so his name was Ethan. We played a game together, and then we played several other games, not with each other. But I was sitting on a bench after several games, and he came over to me, and we just started engaging in conversation. And at some point, he says this, he says, "How old are you?" And I said, "Ethan, how old do you think I am?" He said, let me think. He said, "I would say you're in your 40s, maybe late 30s. And I thought, I look good. I am holding my age well. And then I got up, and my feet were on fire, and my back was stiff, and I dragged myself to the court, and my body said, "You cannot lie to yourself." And that kid's a suck-up. He wasn't telling the truth anyway. The hardest part about aging, it's not the wrinkles, it's not the gray hair, it's not the aches and the pains. It's what it's telling us about our life. That unlike God, our bodies are not eternal. Moses puts it this way. He says, you turn people back to dust, saying, "Return to dust, you mortals." In the past century, we've made remarkable advances in medicine. On average, this generation will live longer than any previous generation in a long, long time. And that's a wonderful gift. But even if medical science continues to extend our lives, Moses wants us to understand that the longest human life will be astonishingly short compared to the eternity of God. He says this in verse 4, 1,000 years in your sight are like a day that has just gone by, or like a watch in the night. We think in terms of decades. God thinks in terms of eternity. Yes, there are days that seem to crawl by, but Life goes by at a breathtaking speed. Sit down sometime and talk to somebody in their 90s. Ask them how quickly life has gone by. And chances are they're going to say, it has flown by. It has gone so quick. And that's exactly what Moses says next in verse 5. He says, yet you sweep people away in the sleep of death. They are like the new grass of the morning. In the morning it springs up new, but by evening it is dry and withered. Now listen, death was not a part of God's original plan. God intended for Adam and Eve to dwell forever in his presence in the Garden of Eden. But you know what happened? Adam and Eve at some point made the decision, why don't we just take one bite out of that forbidden fruit? They rebelled. They sinned. And since then, every generation has repeated that same rebellion in countless different ways. This is the second thing that we discover about ourselves when Moses holds up that mirror of Psalm 90. That not only are we mortal, but we are sinners. And God's fully aware of every one of our sins, even the sins that nobody else knows about. Even the sins that are buried deep within us, even the sins that we don't even recognize in ourselves. In fact, Moses says this in verse 8. He says, you have set our iniquities before you, our secret sins in the light of your presence. This isn't easy to hear, but every one of those sins is an offense against a holy God and God's holiness. That's why God doesn't overlook sin. That's why he doesn't sweep it under the rug. Because of what sin has done to his good creation, to people, to relationships, to the world itself, he judges it. And that's why there is death. Death is not just a natural part of life. It is God's righteous judgment against sin. Every time we read an obituary, every time you attend a memorial service, you are reminded that God takes sin seriously. And again, this may sound harsh to our ears, but Moses isn't complaining. He's simply acknowledging a reality when he makes this statement in verse 7. We are consumed by your anger and terrified by your indignation. And then Moses makes an observation that's just as true today as it was generations ago. He says this in verse 11. In other words, he says, if only we knew the power of your anger. Your wrath is as great as the fear that is your due. In other words, we don't fully grasp the seriousness of our sin or the holiness of the God that we have sinned against. And that is a timely word for us today. In so many ways, we try to take the sting out of sin. We call it a personality trait. We call it just being human. We make it excuses for it. We call it anything but what God calls it. He calls it sin. Moses won't let us get away with this. He holds up the mirror and he reminds us that our sin is serious because the God that we have sinned against is infinitely holy. Now, up until this moment, Moses is trying to help us see reality for what it is. God's eternal. Our days are numbered. Our sin, we are sinners, and it is serious, far more serious than we realize. And out of that reality, Moses makes this request that we read earlier in verse 12. He says, teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. Notice what Moses is praying for. He's not saying, God, please give me more days. That's not his prayer at all. What he does say is this, God, please teach me how to be wise, to live my days well. Give me wisdom. What exactly does that wisdom look like? Well, Moses doesn't leave us guessing. He answers that in the rest of the psalm. Having seen sin in light of God's holiness, he recognizes immediately, here's what I need more than anything else. I need mercy. And it's what we need as well, right? Now, thankfully, that the mercy that Moses prayed for, it has been provided for us in Jesus Christ. Listen to the words of Paul in Romans chapter 5, verse 8 through 9. He says this, "But God demonstrates his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And since we have been justified by his blood, how much more shall we be saved from God's wrath through him?" The wrath that Moses describes, it fell on Christ so that we might receive the mercy that Moses prayed for. In verse, I think it's 13 maybe, Moses cries out this. He says, "Relent, God," or "Relent, Lord." In other words, stop, Lord. No, don't be angry anymore with us, Lord. That prayer is fully answered at the cross. In this mercy that God gives to us, it's not earned. It is a gift. It is a gift that we receive. And how do we receive it? Through sharing in the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ through baptism. Paul goes on to say in chapter 6, he says this, "Or don't you know that all of us who were baptized into Christ Jesus were baptized into his death? We were therefore buried through baptism into death, in order that just as Christ was raised from the dead through the glory of the Father, we too may live a new life." That's what God's mercy does. It doesn't just forgive us of our past, it also gives us a whole new life. Now, Moses doesn't stop with a request for mercy. He goes on and he continues by saying this, "Satisfy us in the morning." Doesn't that touch on one of the deepest longings of the human heart? So many of us wake up every single morning and there is just this quiet internal sense of dissatisfaction. And so we spend the rest of the day chasing it. We kind of figure that, you know what, I can find that satisfaction I'm looking for in my career. I can find it in relationships. I can find it in accomplishments. I can find it in possessions. I can find it in experiences. We find ourselves saying things like, if I just get this next promotion, I'll be satisfied. If I can just find that person to spend the rest of my life with, I'll be satisfied. If I can just get pregnant, I'll be satisfied. If I can just retire, I'll be satisfied. But Moses knows better, and so he prays for something very, very different. He goes on and he says this, "Satisfy us in the morning." And here's how I want you to satisfy us, Lord, with your unfailing love. Think about everything that Moses could have prayed for. He could have said, "God, please, get these griping people to be quiet, and I'll finally be satisfied. Give us something more tasty than manna to eat, and I will be satisfied. God, get rid of all these deadly snakes in the desert, and I'll be satisfied. God, lead us into the promised land, and I know then I will finally be satisfied." But he doesn't pray for any of those things. Why? Because he knows what we so often miss, that satisfaction, the deepest longing of the heart, it's not found in a change of circumstances. It is found in God himself. That's where you find it. Moses has already shown us that everything else in life is so temporary. Our days are numbered. Our bodies wear out. Even the greatest blessings of this life cannot last forever, but God's steadfast love, it never changes. And only an eternal God can satisfy the deepest longings of a temporary people. Now, notice what the result is, because this is absolutely amazing. He says this, "That we may sing for joy and be glad all our days." Moses isn't saying that life suddenly becomes easier. Moses knew heartache, he knew disappointment, he knew grief. He knows all that's a reality of life. And still he says this, even though I've buried an entire generation, even though I'm standing on the outside of the promised land, I'm not going in there, he still knows this. If you'll satisfy me with your unfailing love, God, I'm going to go about my days with joy, and I'm going to go about my days with gladness. When God's unfailing love becomes your deepest satisfaction, your circumstances no longer have the final say over your joy. It doesn't matter what's happening in your life. There's a joy, there is a gladness deep within you, because you know this is the one thing that nobody else can take away. And after praying for mercy and satisfaction, Moses looks beyond himself. He says this in verse 16, "May your deeds be shown to your servants, your splendor to their children." Moses has seen the mighty works of God. He has witnessed the plagues. He has witnessed the Red Sea parting and walking across. He's witnessed people being healed. And yet, what does he pray? I want to see it again. I want to see more of your mighty works. He doesn't just pray that for himself, but he also prays that for future generations. I want future generations to see your mighty work, God. I want them to be shown your splendor. I want them to know your glory. May that be our prayer as well. May we be a people who cry out to God on a regular basis. Show us your mighty works, God. Please, show us. We want you to soften hard hearts, God. We want you to bring broken families back together, God. We want you to break the power of addiction in people's lives, God. We want you to give peace to those who are anxious, God. We want lost people to be found, God. We want lives to be transformed, God. Show us your mighty work again, Lord, but not just for us. Do it for every generation that follows us, because we want them to see your glory as well. And there's one final request. After praying for God to show his work, he then prays, establish our work, God. He goes on to say this, may the favor of the Lord our God rest on us. Establish the work of our hands for us. Yes, establish the work of our hands. Moses has spent so much of this psalm talking about the brevity of life. He says we're like grass that comes up in the morning and then by evening we wither away. He says your days are numbered. And yet his conclusion is not, you know what, so what's the point? Life is useless. That's not his conclusion. His conclusion is this, Lord, make my life count. It's brief, but make it count. The word established simply means to make firm, lasting, enduring. Moses knows that he cannot give his own life lasting significance. He asks God to do it. In other words, Lord, let my brief life accomplish something that outlasts me. Isn't that what we all want? And we don't want to spend our entire lives chasing after something that's going to disappear the moment we die. We want our lives to matter. We want our marriages to matter. We want our work to matter. We want our service to matter. This is what Moses prays for. Because only God, the eternal God, can give eternal significance to temporary lives. So Moses closes his prayer by repeating himself. Establish the work of our hands for us. Yes, establish the work of our hands. Why the repetition? Because this isn't just a simple request. This is the heart cry of Moses. God, please make my life count. May it be the cry of our heart as well. Just as we've done throughout this series from time to time, I want to give you a moment just to spend time with the Lord in silence. Last week, we spent time just being still, not really praying, not really saying anything, but just sitting with God. This week, I want us to be still, but I want us to make a request for God to show us his mighty works again, but also for this heart cry to come out. God, make our lives count. Do something in us, do something through us this week that will outlast us and make this place a better place for your glory.